Let's talk about prosodics or suprasegmentals. These are dealing with stress, rhythm, and intonation of English. For this section, we will be working on distinguishing between the segments and characteristics of speech that go beyond segments, or, as we call them, suprasegmentals. We also will be recognizing that stress time is a major characteristic of English rhythm and contrasts a lot with rhythm in other languages. We will be identifying the process of vowel reduction as one of the most prominent and difficult characteristics of English pronunciation for non-native speakers to master. We already touched on this issue in the previous lecture, and we will be going deeper into it this time. Finally, we will define common articulatory processes that occur in connected speech. Up to now, when talking about consonants and vowels, we've been talking about segments. We can talk about the sh segment, the e segment, the p segment, the ng segment, as in swimming, and the e segment in this case. We also saw that segments have different characteristics. For example, segment sh is a consonant, so then we have a place of articulation, a manner of articulation, and voicing. Conversely, we saw how vowels, for example, E, are not ruled by those characteristics, but by the height, the badness, tenseness, and roundness of lips. Of course, we know that these segments combine usually to form bigger pieces that we call words. If we combine vocalic segments and consonant segments, we could see how this word reads as shipping. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this reduced vowel schwa because it's very important for rhythm and stress. So when we talk about segments, we're talking about individual sounds, but suprasegmentals go beyond the segment when they combine. And when they combine, special things happen. One of them is that in English, vowels that are not in stress position get reduced to a schwa. This gives a very particular rhythm to English. So in this case, we could say the word shipping in many ways. If we change the intonation, we might say shipping. If we change the stress, we can say instead of shipping, we could say shipping. That creates a different sound. If we pronounce every single vowel and do not reduce the vowel, then we create a different rhythm or music. If we say shipping instead of shipping. So let's take a look at this. Remember what I was telling you last time, that vowels in unstressed position become schwas or weak vowels. In this case, the stress is prominently placed on the first syllable, not the second. The second syllable becomes reduced. There are many languages in the world that are syllable timed. In fact, 3/4 of the languages in the world have a syllable time rhythm. This means that the syllables carry the beat. Let's take a look at this. In Spanish, for example, we say chocolate. As you can see, every single syllable here has more or less the same prominence, chocolate, and all of them are pronouns. The same is true in Nahuatl or Aztec, a native language from Mexico. As you could see, they pronounce chocolate. If we analyze Japanese, for example, Japanese pronunciation, we have chocoreto. So, we have, in Spanish, we have chocolate. In Nahuatl, we have chocolate. And in Japanese, we have chocoreto. Every syllable has prominence. Not in English. In English, we have what is called a stressed timed rhythm. And this provides a very different rhythm or musicality to English. As you could see here, we say chocolate. We say chocolate. Chocolate. Very different from the Spanish, for example, chocolate. In English, then, final part of the word chocolate are not stressed. Therefore, they get reduced. And not only reduced, but in fact, sometimes they disappear, as in this case. The only full vowel that is pronounced is the first one, the one that has the stress. This is called stress time rhythm. Let me show you a little bit more example of these. This is an interview with a bilingual Spanish speaker who is is highly competent in both languages. As you can see, the same person pronounces a lot of peaks signaled by the E right there in the red English pronunciation. And Spanish, it's much more regular. In that sense, the musicality of both languages is very different. While in English is tirin, 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 more or less at same intervals. The stress is full at roughly regular intervals in the stream of speech. In Spanish, the syllables are the ones that carry the beat, and therefore it ends up being a much more regular rhythm. So Spanish would sound more like ta 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 ta. In a syllable time language, every syllable is perceived as taking up roughly the same amount of time, though the absolute length of time depends on prosody. Syllable time languages tend to give syllables approximately equal stress and do not generally have reduced vowels. Chinese, Japanese, Finnish, Slovene, French, Brazilian Portuguese, Spanish are commonly quoted as examples of syllable time languages. English, German, Dutch, European Portuguese, Russian, Czech are typically stress time languages. So in this case, as you can see, it's much more regular. to the pronunciation of Spanish. So it's more ta 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 ta. La pronunciación es importante. It's more monotonous. La pronunciación es importante. There's no reduced vowels. All the vowels are pronounced almost with the same length. However, in English, it's very different. As you could see, the diagram right there, we have a lot of syllables that are soft and only one that is prominent. This gives a very different rhythm to English. Pronunciation is important. There's one important thing to note here. There are many different kinds of Englishes in the world. We have the English from India, English from the Caribbean, English from South Africa, etc. And these Englishes might be, more likely than not, syllable timed. In fact, new Englishes in the world have a new kind of rhythm, and they are no longer stress timed. So they have a ta 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 effect. When you go, for example, to South Africa and ask someone from South Africa, they might tell you something like, I am from South Africa. Ta 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 ta. If you ask someone from India, they might say, I am from India. Ta 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 ta. It is really interesting to note that rap, for example, is pretty much a syllable timed language, and that many native English speakers from the varieties of British or American English are actually changing their rhythm when singing to accommodate to the stress time rhythm of rap. Let's take a look at these in a more specific sentence. The dots that are white represent full stresses in English. The rest of them represent secondary stress. So in this case, if we have three words that are monosyllables and that are content words because they carry the content of the sentence, we say cats chase mice. If we were to add two more words, the stress in English is unchanged. Let's use our hands to signal the big stress in English in this sentence. Cats chase mice. If you say, the cats have chased the mice. If you say, the cats have chased mice, we don't change the sentence stress in English. If we add one more, the sentence stress remains the same. The cats will chase the mice. Cats chase mice. The cats have chased mice. The cats will chase the mice. If we add even more words, the same thing happens. The cats have been chasing the mice. The cats have been chasing the mice. Cats chase mice. The cats have been chasing the mice. Finally, we add many more, and still the same is true. The cats could have been chasing the mice. Cats chase mice. The cat will chase the mice. The cat could have been chasing the mice. So as you see, we try and strive to squish in a lot of words that don't have the primary stress to maintain the sentence stress in English, the musicality of English. Clearly, this is something that is very, very difficult for English language learners that come from a syllable timed rhythm language, which, by the way, are most of them. So one of the things that we need to be sure in teaching suprasegmental phonology in English is that the teacher of suprasegmental phonology is rarely done, especially because it is very hard to teach analytically. But if you must, two issues are central. One, raise awareness of suprasegmentals. You could use these exercises that I just provided for you. And second, encourage students to shadow talk on their own and or provide extensive practice on patterns. One important thing to do is to sing along, for example, so that they are able to develop the rhythm. Another important characteristic of suprasegmentals is that of the sentence stress and meaning, and this refers to pragmatics, the intention of the message versus the reception of the message. Usually, intonation gives us meaning as we are asking questions. For example, when we say lunch, it might be interpreted as let's go have lunch. All you have to do is to increase the pitch in the intonation. In this case, sentence stress also can be used to emphasize different messages. For example, Carla is leaving Paris next week. In that sense, you're emphasizing the time. Number 5, for example, Carla is leaving to Paris next week. You are emphasizing the person. Again, this is something that English language learners have a lot of trouble with. Let's take a look at some articulatory processes in connected speech. So we can look at assimilation, vowel reduction, which we've been talking a lot about, epenthesis, and deletion. These articulatory processes are present both in native and non-native speakers of English. In fact, many times they are desirable and they are subconscious. We don't know that we do them. So which one is an articulatory process in which a sound changes by assuming one or more articulatory properties of a neighboring sound? So in other words, this is when one sound takes the characteristic of another sound. Let's take a look. Which one is a process by which a sound is completely removed? Which one is a process characterized by the insertion of a new sound in an existing sequence of sounds? And finally, which one is an articulatory process characterized by the centralization and weakening of an unstressed vowel, such as the characteristic change of many vowels at the end of words to schwa? So assimilation is basically when one sound takes or assimilates the characteristics of another sound. Vowel reduction, as we've seen, is these articulatory processes of weakening of a stressed vowel. Deletion is the process by which a sound is completely removed. And epenthesis is the process characterized by the insertion of a new sound in an existing sequence of sounds. You might need to remember these if the speaker that you are analyzing in the oral sample displays any of these. So once again, let's take a look at assimilation. The process of a sound to take on characteristics of a sound that is next to it. Assimilation is a very common process, and many times we actually don't recognize that we do it. Let's take a look at these examples. This is an example of progressive assimilation. In other words, the articulatory property propagates forward. It goes from before to after the sound. In English, we pronounce different words that are plural differently. We pronounce them either as z or as s. The voicing is different. So, for example, in bananas, do we pronounce z at the end or s at the end? Yes, we pronounce z. Why is this? This is because the voicing of the vowel a propagates forward into the final s, passing along the characteristics of voicing from the a, which is voiced, all vowels are voiced, to the s, that normally is not voiced, but in this case it is, because of the environment in which it is. Give it a try. Try to guess if number 2 to 8 are pronounced with the allophone z or the allophone s. The allophones are different realizations of the same sound. In this case, plural, represented by s or es, has two allophones in English, z and s. So what about grapes? Grapes. Yes, with s. Why? Because the last sound, the neighboring sound close to s, the last s in grapes, the last sound that is pronounced is p, and p is voiceless. Therefore, it propagates the articulatory property forward to the s. How about lemons? Z. Yes, z. Why? Because is voiced. It gives its characteristics of voicing to the plural. What about cookies? Voiced. Yes. The E, cookies, is certainly voiced because all vowels are voiced, so it propagates the characteristics to the s. What about cakes? Think about the last sound in cake is k. Voiceless or voiced? Yes, it's voiceless. So then, therefore, it propagates its voicelessness to the plural. Tarts, voiceless. Potato, O, propagates to S, the voice. And carrots. A very similar example of progressive assimilation happens with the pronunciation of the ed for regular past in English. This is one of the most difficult things that ELL students have to master. And this is one way that you could help them master this. The rule goes like this. Basically, If you have a voiced consonant or vowel, you use d. If you have a voiceless, you pronounce it as t. And if the sound finishes in t or d sound, then it would be id. The allophones for the regular past ed are d, t, and id. So what about studied? D, t, or id? Yes, d. Studied. What about kicked? Kicked. Yes, t. Again, the k, it's voiceless and it propagates its voicelessness to the t. Eliminate, if it finishes in t or d, then you add the ed. Erased, the last sound in erase is s, and it's voiceless, so then it contributes, it propagates its characteristic of voicelessness to the d, to the d sound, to the d letter. In this case would be a t sound. Looked, same with tight. Measure, yes, it's voiced, so then it would be with d. And to round finishes with d, so then it's ed.